finding your quotes, that's fine. So you do have an assignment that's going to be due Wednesday night that I'll talk about after our discussion, and I'll talk about that with you so that you understand that. And hopefully today you'll have some time to get started with that. My first period discussion ran a little bit long, so they didn't have as much time to work on theirs, but hopefully I won't be as long-winded in fourth period as I was in first. Does anybody need sticky notes that doesn't have any of your own that you want to mark things in your text? I think that it's helpful to use sticky notes just so, like if you have the discussion questions that you work on or you have a quiz, you are able to use your book. So I think that it's helpful to maybe take notes and mark different quotes and things like that as you're reading, but that's definitely optional. Wyatt asked about the chapter summaries that I wanted you to do. They are not graded, but they are to help you. So that is something that I do want you to be doing, but that's for your own personal knowledge. Okay? All right, so you read, we are going to talk about chapters 10 through 12 today. So if you're in this version of the book, chapter 10 starts on page 118. So, and I also wrote down different like discussion questions and stuff, and all I had was my phone near me last night, so that's why I have my phone up here. I do have discussion points in my notes. So let me just start by asking raise your hand if you put a quote down from chapter 10 as one of your two quotes. You had a quote from chapter 10. Nobody put a quote from chapter 10? It's where the title is talked about. Anybody? That's okay if you didn't. So let's go ahead and talk about, it's on page 119 in this version, where Atticus finally talks about what the title means, okay? So let's start in that where the paragraph says, when he gave us, on page 119, when he gave us our air rifles, Atticus wouldn't teach us to shoot. Uncle Jack instructed us in the rudiments thereof. He said Atticus wasn't interested in guns. Atticus said to Jim one day, I'd rather you shot at tin cans in the backyard, but I know you'll go after birds. Shoot all the blue jays you want if you can hit them, but remember it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. That was the only time I ever heard Atticus say it was a sin to do something, and I asked Miss Maudie about it. Your father's right, she said. Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy. They don't eat up people's gardens. They don't nest in corn cribs. They don't do one thing but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird. So I would definitely mark this as a significant section of chapter 10 because we do finally see what the title means. So I forgot what I was going to say. So your assignment that you're going to get today, and it's not going to be due until Wednesday night if you need that much time to work on it, is going to focus on symbolism found in chapters 7 through 12, okay? So that's going to be the majority of our conversation today is identifying symbolism in these chapters. So if we're thinking of symbolism, and we don't know a whole lot thus far in the book, we have gotten to part 2. Chapter 12 does start part 2. And I think that in the second part is where you really see the trial come to light. And I think that this will make more sense then. But if you had to say what characters thus far in the book would be symbolic of a mockingbird, who would you say? If you had to pick a character, if you're thinking in terms of what Atticus said, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird because why? How does Miss Maudie explain it?
They don't do anything against me.
They don't do anything harmful. They don't mess up anything. All they do is sit in a tree and they sing. They're just pleasant creatures, so there's no reason why you should target them to shoot them, right? So thinking of it that way, what characters in the novel thus far could be symbolic of a mockingbird? Do you think? Why? What you think?
That's a good question.
Well, what are your thoughts? If you had to say a character was symbolic of a mockingbird, who is the town targeted? Who? Very good, Amber. Would Boo Radley not be a good example of a mockingbird? People tend to target him, to ostracize him, to separate him from society simply because he's different than everyone else. And they're scared of him for whatever reason. So Boo Radley would be a great example of a mockingbird. Garrett, what do you want to say?
I was gonna say, I thought they didn't do anything harmful. Didn't he stab his father?
Well, that's not proven, is it?
Very good, Zoe. It's not proven. This is just stories that have been passed on throughout the neighborhood. But that's a great point, Garrett. Who else could be a mockingbird? This one may not be as clear now. It may become more clear as the trial gets started. But Tom Robinson is often compared to a mockingbird in just literary discussions. People say that he is, I don't want to get too far into that because I don't want to talk about the trial until we get to that point. But just keep that in mind that the mockingbirds in the novel thus far could be Boo Radley and Tom Robinson would be a second one. Let's see. What is the big event that takes place in chapter 10? What is the main thing that happens? Chloe? Atticus does something.
Atticus kills the rabbit dog.
Very good. So they refer to this dog that the kids see first, and then they run to Calpurnia and they say she says it's a mad dog, okay? Mad in this case is referring to a dog who is infected with rabies, okay? So why would it be dangerous for a dog with rabies to make its way to their street? Amber?
Because if it bites someone, they should get real sick.
Very good. If it bites or attacks anyone, that person then is infected with rabies. Now, you get rabies shots now, but they didn't have that in the 1930s. So basically, if you got rabies, you died. And that was just it. So you can understand the urgency in Calpurnia's voice when she is trying to communicate to Eula May, the telephone operator, that there's a mad dog on their street and somebody needs to come and take care of it. The only way to put down a mad dog is to do what? Kill it. Okay? So Hecate, if you'll turn to page 126 and 127. Hecate and Atticus show up together. Hecate is who? Y'all remember? It's at the bottom of page 126.
Sheriff?
Yep, he is the sheriff of Macomb County. So you've got the sheriff, and then you've got this just lawyer who is in Macomb together. Ultimately, it is Atticus who takes the shot. And why does Hecate not take the shot? Amber?
Because he hasn't shot a gun in over, 30 years?
No, that's Atticus. Atticus hasn't shot a gun in over 30 years. Right? Yeah, because he says, I can't shoot that well and you know it. And Atticus says, I haven't shot a gun in 30 years. And then Tate says, I'd feel mighty comfortable if you did now. Heck's argument is that the dog is right in front of the Radley house. If he misses, the shot is going inside the house and could hurt somebody inside the house. So he doesn't want to take the chance. So we learn that Atticus was one of the best shots in Macomb, and everybody knew it, okay? But why is Atticus so anti-guns if he's so good at shooting them? Why is Atticus so anti-guns if he's so good at shooting them? This comes later in chapter 10, towards the end. Look on page 130. And we'll start towards the top. He never said anything about that, Jim muttered. Never said anything about it, did he? No, ma'am. Wonder why he never goes hunting now, I said. Maybe I can tell you, said Miss Maudie. If your father's anything, he's civilized in his heart. Marksmanship's a gift from God, a talent. Oh, you have to practice to make it perfect, but shooting's different from playing the piano or the like. I think maybe he put his gun down when he realized that God had given him an unfair advantage over most living things. I guess he decided he wouldn't shoot till he had to, and today he had to. So what is Miss Maudie's understanding of why Atticus has not ever mentioned that he shoots a gun? He's never let Jim and Scout know that he's a good shot. He's he got them the air rifles, but who taught them how to shoot?
Jack.
Uncle Jack. Yeah, Atticus didn't teach them. So how does she explain that? Why Atticus no longer has anything to do with guns? What is she basically saying? Go ahead, Chloe.
Because he doesn't like the unfair advantage.
Yes. Because he is so good, he saw it as an unfair advantage to the living creatures that he was shooting at, which is a very interesting perspective. And what does that show us about who Atticus is as a character?
He's sweet at heart.
Yes. He is good as gold in his heart. He is all about living morally and doing things the right way. And to him, it just wasn't fair to be able to kill something that didn't have the ability to defend itself, if that makes sense. Okay. Now, why do you think that Atticus kept it from Jim and Scout? Because the whole first chapter, they're talking about how boring their dad is. He doesn't throw football. He won't play in the fundraiser game. He just reads. He's old. So why does he not tell them? Why does he not, it's almost like he doesn't want them to know.
Because he's not proud of it.
Very good. He's not proud of it, but he should be, right? Something that someone's very talented at should be something that they're proud of. So Atticus is not a prideful man at all. So that's very important to note. I also want to ask you about the quote on page 131. The very last line of chapter 10, Jim says, Atticus is a gentleman, just like me. Why do you think Jim says that? And is Jim a gentleman? Why does he say Atticus is a gentleman and he says just like me? Or what does that show us? Lauren?
What page was that on?
131. Lindsay, what you think? Why does he say Atticus is a gentleman and then he says just like me? What does he mean by he's a gentleman? Do you think? What does anybody mean when they call someone a gentleman? Kind, good mannered, they have high morals. Do we think Jim is a gentleman?
No,
Why not?
because he's rowdy and,
He is very rowdy, yes.
and he does stuff that wouldn't be really gentlemanly.
Yes, but the fact that he says this shows us that who does Jim want to grow up to be like? He wants to grow up to be just like Atticus. Okay, very good. Do we have any questions on chapter 10? All right, let's talk about symbolism in chapter 10. the whole situation of the mad dog, Atticus shooting the mad dog, the town staying inside, closing their doors, letting Atticus handle it. What is this situation symbolic of that's going to come later in the novel?
The trial.
Good, Zoe, the trial. Can you explain it a little bit?
Well, the trials, it gets two people. Two people are fighting, and it's kind of like the dog and Atticus.
Very good. The dog could be, now let's go back to one of the chapters before chapter 10, like one of either 7, 8, or 9, I can't remember because I just read it Friday. He makes the comment that he knows he's not going to win this trial. He has said that multiple times. He's not going to win. But he says, I intend to jar the jury a bit. So what is Atticus's aim, or what is his end game in the trial? If he knows he's not going to win, it's not going to make him look good, then what is his point? Amber?
That I think is like he's gonna try to like side with the jury and make them like change their perspective and everything, like how they see Robertson.
Change their perspective. He says if he could change one person's mind on that jury, to make them think for just a second, do we really have the evidence for this trial, or is it simply just a white man against a black man?
Yeah.
Is that the issue?
Yeah.
So how does that play into the situation in chapter 10? What could that mad dog that he takes down with one shot, what could it be a symbol of?
One person who needs to change their mind.
That's a good guess. What could that dog symbolize if Atticus's goal is to just take one out? Change one person's mind about what? What is the deadly disease that is rooted in this town? Racism. Okay. If the dog is a symbol of the racism, what color is the dog? Did y'all pick up on that? He's brown. So if the dog symbolizes racism, and Atticus is the one who shoots it and takes it down, what did the rest of the street do while Atticus put himself on the front lines in front of that rabid dog and shot him? What were they doing? They were standing at the window watching him, right? They want to see what's happening, but they don't want to what? They don't want to change anything. They don't want to be the one to make that change. Because that's a hard job. To be the person to try to change people's minds and perspectives that they have had that same mindset for years and years and years, that's a really hard job that nobody really wants to do. But Atticus is the one to do it because he knows it's right and that he has to do it, okay? Did we see any other symbols in chapter 10? That was the main one that I had. But there maybe could be. And we talked about the mockingbird, how it's symbolic. All right, so let's go to chapter 11. Anybody have a quote in chapter 11? What chapter is it? Oh, God, I made y'all go all the way back to 7. No wonder y'all didn't have any quotes from 10 or 11. Anybody have 11? Any quote from 11? Okay. So chapter 11, we meet the lovely Mrs. DeBose. What is Mrs. DeBose's issue? Amber?
She's the one with the addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mrs. DeBose was addicted to morphine. Okay, morphine is a very powerful pain-killing drug that we really only use now today unless it is absolutely necessary, like someone loses a limb and they need morphine, like quick, okay? But back in the day, you would get morphine if you had like frequent headaches. Like it was given that easy. So many people developed morphine addictions because it was the only powerful, it was like the one pain-killing drug that doctors prescribed, okay? Also, we don't prescribe morphine anymore. It has to be given by a doctor or a paramedic or someone like that. So, Mrs. DeBose became a morphine addict. And what was her goal? Before she died, Garrett, what was her goal before she died with the morphine? She wanted to what? Go ahead.
quit it?
Yeah, she wanted to be free of the morphine addiction. So, what is it that she says, and you don't have to say verbatim, you can point out in the book what she says. What does she say? Because this woman is hateful. She calls Scout ugly every time she walks by her house. She tells her that she shouldn't be wearing overalls because she's a lady, and that her whole family is crazy, and that her mother, she said, your mother was a good person, but she wouldn't like the way your father has been raising you all, is what she says. But there's one line that she says that just sets Jim off. It's the last straw, and he kind of loses it after that. You can point it out. You don't need to repeat it.
The last sentence says 135.
Very good. It is the last sentence on page 135 in this version of the book, down at the bottom. She says, your father's no better than and trash he works for. Okay? That's the last thing she says as Jim and Scout are walking into town. They go into town, and Scout decides that she wants to buy a baton. That's what she's wanted. Okay? So they buy that, and they're on their way back home. Then turn to page 136. Down towards the bottom. In later years, I sometimes wondered exactly what made Jim do it. What made him break the bonds of, you just be a gentleman's son, which who said that? Atticus. And the phase of self-conscious rectitude he had recently entered. Jim had probably stood as much guff about Atticus lawing for as had I. And I took it for granted that he kept his temper. He had a naturally tranquil disposition and a slow fuse. At the time, however, I thought the only explanation for what he did was that for a few minutes, he simply went mad. What Jim did was something I'd do as a matter of course had I not been under Atticus' interdict, which I assumed including not fighting horrible old ladies. We had just come to her gate when Jim snatched my baton and ran flailing wildly up the steps into Mrs. DeBose's front yard. Forgetting everything Atticus had said, forgetting that she packed a pistol under her shawls, forgetting that if Mrs. DeBose missed, her girl Jessie probably wouldn't. He did not calm down until he had cut the tops off every camellia bush Mrs. DeBose owned, until the ground was littered with green buds and leaves. He bent my baton against his knee, snapped it in two, and threw it down. All right, so he goes into her yard. She's got these beautiful bushes that have these full, beautiful flowers on them, okay? He takes the baton and he whacks off all the flowers off the bush so that they're just scattered everywhere, okay? Why does he do that particular act, you think? Why?
She liked her flowers a lot. That was her favorite thing.
Very good. This woman loved her flowers, just like Miss Maudie. Your garden and your yard showed a lot about who you were as a person. So those were things that people cared a lot about. So he destroys everything in her yard. So when Atticus comes home, what does he tell Jim that his punishment is? Ben, what does he say is Jim's punishment on page 138? Well, I'm sorry. He goes to talk to Mrs. DeBose. He has to go down to her house and talk to her. But look on page 139 when he comes back. It ain't on that page either.
He has to go restore for
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ben. That was my fault. I was pointing you in the wrong direction. Yes, it's on page 140. He has to read to Mrs. DeBose every afternoon after school. Okay? That means going into this crazy old lady's house, sitting with her, and reading for however long she needs him to read. What?
Those 2 hours.
2 hours. Thank you, Amber. So they start reading to Mrs. DeBose, and the time gets a little bit longer each time they go and read. Okay? They notice an alarm clock sits on Mrs. DeBose's nightstand. So she's laying in her bed when they go read, and she has an alarm clock on her nightstand. When the alarm clock goes off, Jessie comes in, her nurse, the lady that helps take care of her, she comes in and tells the children it's time for them to leave, that it's time for her medicine. So what is it that she's doing? What is the medicine that she waits longer and longer for?
morphine.
The morphine, okay? So she is an addict trying to wean herself off of the drug that she is addicted to. That takes a strong person to be able to do that. To be able to know that you're addicted to something, and to know that you want to break that addiction, and to be able to have the what's the word I'm looking for?
Self-control.
Thank you. Self-control to overcome that. All right. So, what happens to Mrs. DeBose at the end of chapter 11?
She does.
She does pass away. And what does she send in a box for Jim? It is a beautiful camellia flower in a box just for Jim. Why does she do that, you think? What is she doing?
To thank you.
Oh, see? 2 very different perspectives. I love it. What was your answer?
I said to thank you for helping her.
She says Mrs. DeBose is thanking Jim for what he did. Chloe says,
As a last laugh.
yeah, beyond the grave, she says, I'm going to have the last laugh. Because you tried to ruin my flowers, but you didn't succeed. Here's one to remind you that you were not successful in ruining my flowers. But, Amber, I think you make a really good point. I mean, maybe once she got past the morphine addiction, she was thankful. And she was thankful because what was the purpose of them reading to her?
To distract.
Get her off.
To distract her from needing the pain medicine. Okay? So, I'm not saying you're wrong. I think that that's a great point. So, let me keep up with my little notes here. The most important part, I believe, of this chapter happens at the very end on pages 148 and 149. On page 149, Atticus refers to her as a great lady, and that just takes Jim by storm. Like, he cannot believe that he would refer to her as a lady. So Jim, he says, a lady? Jim raised his head. His face was scarlet. After all those things she said about you, a lady? She was. She had her own views about things, a lot different from mine, maybe. Son, I told you that if you hadn't lost your head, I'd have made you go read to her. I wanted you to see something about her. I wanted you to see what real courage is. Instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. You rarely win, but sometimes you do. Mrs. DeBose won, all 98 pounds of her. According to her views, she died beholden to nothing and nobody. She was the bravest person I ever knew. So what lesson does Atticus want Jim to understand? This ties in to chapter 10 as well.
That bravery isn't always the person with the gun. It's sometimes what you do.
Good? Amber, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say that, like, what pretty much Chloe said.
Okay. You may want to add anything else? You're right, Chloe. He wanted them to understand Jim and Scout are so bent on shooting guns. Scout likes to fight. those are things that these kids see as being courageous. She says, I think Scout's mentality is if somebody says something hateful about my dad and I react by fighting, I'm showing courage if I fight that person for what they said. But Atticus wants her to understand that that's not courageous at all. It's stooping down to their level. Same thing with Jim and these guns. He's obsessed with shooting guns. He wants Atticus to show him how to shoot guns. So he wants him to understand that being courageous is not always using violence. Sometimes courage is making a decision and seeing it through all the way to the end of it. Okay, very good. Questions on chapter 11? Comments, concerns? What about symbolism in chapter 11? This one you got to think about. What symbols do we see in chapter 11? Remember, symbols are things that are actual objects, but they can represent a bigger idea. Think about that think about that for just a second. I'm going to give it a break. All right, Chloe, what were you going to say?
The Camilla,
What could that be symbolic of?
how either her thanking him or it could be symbolizing Miss Dubo.
Okay, symbolizing her how? I do think that Camilla symbolizes something. I'm just not quite sure what it is. So that's why I'm like talking about it out loud. Wyatt?
The gift could symbolize like her presence, and maybe he keeps the flower and he doesn't.
Okay, good. Amber, is that what you're going to say? Okay. Any other thoughts on what the Camilla could symbolize? Go ahead.
Maybe like her journey through it all.
Ooh, that's a good one. Her journey of overcoming addiction. Very good. Okay. I'm not saying that, you're right or wrong. We don't know what things symbolize. It's just meant for discussion and, people can have different ideas, but those were all very good. What else in chapter 11 could be a symbol? There's something mentioned that we've now seen twice. An object. Jim got one, and then there's one in this chapter.
The gun.
That's a good guess. The gun could be a symbol. What could the gun be a symbol of, you think?
Hatred.
Hatred?
How people assume things so fast.
Ooh, tying into the courage quote. Yeah, good. What about the clock? Is that not the second time we've seen a clock? Where else did we see one? Not a clock, but yes. Jim finds a watch in the knothole. And then we also hear about an alarm clock in this chapter. Think about a theme that would have to do with time. Think about what time of their life they're currently in. Sometimes people wish that childhood would what?
Last forever.
Last forever. Why do people want childhood to last forever?
Because then you have to grow up.
Yes. And growing up definitely sucks. I'm telling you firsthand from my own experience that it sucks. So don't expect anything different. People often want childhood to just time. They wish time would stand still when you're a child, because when you're a child, especially in this from the perspective of Jim and Scout, they're very innocent to all the bad things of the world that they're getting ready to be exposed to in these next couple of chapters. But I think that the clock keeps reoccurring is a symbol that keeps referring to this time period of them being children they have one type of mindset as kids, and then in the next couple of chapters, they're kind of forced to grow up a little bit when they're faced with these hateful things that their friends and their neighbors will say to them, and how people will perceive Atticus as he takes the next couple steps in the trial. All right, chapter 12. Chapter 12 starts part 2 of the book. And this is the chapter where Calpurnia takes Jim and Scout to church. Now, Calpurnia is black. The Finches are white. Let's make sure that everybody's on the same page about that, because some people were confused about what color the Finches were. So, my first question is, why does Calpurnia take extra steps to get Jim and Scout ready for her church? Amber?
She doesn't want other people to think that she doesn't take care of them.
Yes. These children, she has raised them from basically since they were babies. Their mom passed away when Jim was 2, so Scout was not very old when their mother passed away. So Calpurnia is really the only woman, and Miss Maudie are the only women that they've ever really had close relationships with. So Calpurnia knows if I take these white children to my church, they are going to look top-notch, the best they've ever looked. Nobody can say that I don't care for these 2 children. Okay, very good. What do we think about old Lula? Oh, wait, one more question. Why is the church called First Purchase?
Because it was the first big purchase that the black people had.
After they were?
Freedom.
Yes. After the original people who started the church, after they were freed slaves, this was the first thing they purchased together with their earnings as a working individual. So they called it First Purchase. Okay? Now, knowing that, why do you think Lula is so hateful to Jim and Scout when she sees that they've come to her church? Let's read. Flip that next page. Page 158. So they walk up to church, and it says, "What you up to, Miss Cal?" said a voice behind us. Calpurnia's hands went to our shoulders, and we stopped and looked around. Standing in the path behind us was a tall Negro woman. Her weight was on one leg. She rested her left elbow in the curve of her hip, pointing at us with upturned palm. She was bullet-headed with strange, almond-shaped eyes, straight nose, and an Indian bow mouth. She seemed 7 feet high. I felt Calpurnia's hand dig into my shoulder. "What you want, Lula?" she asked, in tones I had never heard her use. She spoke quietly, contemptuously. "I wants to know why you bringing white chillin' to church." "That's my company," said Calpurnia. Again, I thought her voice strange. She was talking like the rest of them. "Yeah, and I reckon you's company at the Finch house during the week." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Don't you fret," Calpurnia whispered to me, but the roses on her hat trembled indignantly. When Lula came up the pathway toward us, Calpurnia said, "Stop right there." Lula stopped, but she said, "You ain't got no business bringing white chillin' here. They got their church, we got ours. It is our church, ain't it, Miss Cal?" Calpurnia said, "It's the same God, ain't it?" Jim said, "Let's go home, Cal. They don't want us here." I agreed. They did not want us here. I sensed, rather than saw, that we were being advanced upon. They seemed to be drawing closer to us, but when I looked up at Calpurnia, there was amusement in her eyes. When I looked down the pathway again, Lula was gone. In her place was a solid mass of colored people. One of them stepped from the crowd. It was Zebo, the garbage collector. "Mr. Jim," he said, "we're mighty glad to have you all here. Don't pay no attention to Lula. She's contentious because Reverend Sykes threatened to church her. She's a troublemaker from way back, got fancy ideas and haughty ways. We're mighty glad to have you all." With that, Calpurnia led us to the church door, where we were greeted by Reverend Sykes, who led us to the front pew. So why does she get so ugly with them that they're there? Lauren? She says, we have our church, and they have what? They have their own church. How do you think the black community feels when they are all gathered in this one place 1 day a week? How do you think they feel when they're together? Garrett? Safe. The church is a symbol of feeling safe. This is a place where these people can come together and worship on Sundays and not be criticized, not be talked down to. It's a place where they can come together and they can worship together. So she is very offended that Calpurnia would think it's a good idea to bring anyone who is white into their safe place. Okay? So you can kind of understand why she feels the way that she does. But at the same time, you're like, okay, they're kids. Like, you don't have to be crazy. Chloe, do you have your note?
No.
Oh, I thought you did. So, they go into church. And my next question is, do you think that Reverend Sykes was justified in his actions? Why or why not? Reverend Sykes takes up an offering for who? Who are they trying to take up money to support? Tom's wife. Okay, close to it. Tom's wife has not been able to find a job since her husband has been accused of rape. Okay, nobody will hire her. They've got several kids. It's the Great Depression. Kids need to eat. She needs to eat to survive. So Reverend Sykes decides he's going to take up an offering to donate to Tom's wife and children. Okay, he's got good intentions. Okay, don't get me wrong. He's got good intentions, but he goes to the back of the church and he shuts the doors and he locks them. So everybody's still in the church with a locked door. I think from that point I'd be out at that because I don't. Then he says nobody is leaving until we have $10. $10 to us is nothing, right? Like you might give $10 on Sunday total. But in this time period, $10 would have gotten you pretty far. So he locks the doors and he basically tells them, we're going to stay here until we get the $10 collected for his family. Now, is he justified in what he does? Why or why not?
Yes.
Okay, Chloe, you say yes. Why?
Because Tom's wife doesn't have any money to feed her children or anything.
Okay.
And so she needs money to give her children food and water and
So the rest of,
basic needs.
and I'm just playing devil's advocate, okay? So all the other people in that congregation should squeeze their pockets to help her out.
I think he used it to his advantage. He has the pulpit and he has his rights to speak, and he used it against everybody else.
Very
It was
good.
a good thing, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing.
Very good. Wyatt, what were you going to say?
It was a good thing, but he did it wrong.
He went about it the wrong way. I agree. Yes. Amber, is that what you were going to say? I think that his heart was good. He wanted to help the family. They need all those things. Those children need to be able to survive. But he was calling people out. He was like, so-and-so back there, you ain't even walked up here. You better come bring something up here. You better give something. And then he starts calling other people out. So-and-so, you don't have any kids. You could spare another quarter. You could spare another nickel. So I think at that point, he's kind of crossing the line there, calling people out. And he would have never gotten away with that today. Like if a pastor did that today, he'd be out. But I think it's kind of, he had, like we said, he had the right intentions. He went about it the wrong way, okay? All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is Scout is genuinely confused at how Calpurnia is able to change the way she speaks depending on who she's around, okay? Where did Calpurnia grow up? Where does she tell us she grew up? Page 166.
Finch's Landing.
Yeah, she grew up near Finch's Landing. Okay. She says they're talking about how they don't have hymns in their church because most of those people in that church can't read. So they would serve no purpose if they had hymnals to read by. So she talks about, they ask her how she learned to read. And she says that she taught her son to read from the Bible every day. And that their granddaddy Finch gave her a book, gave her the Bible. And then Jim asks, were you from the Landing? You never told us that. And she says, I certainly am, Mr. Jim. Grew up down there between the Buford place and the Landing. I've spent all my days working for the Finches or the Bufords, and I moved to Macomb when your daddy and your mama married. So Calpurnia has grown up and spent her life around lots of white people, okay? Typically, when you are growing up, you start picking up on the ways people speak that you're around, okay? An example would be, if your parents don't really curse, then you're not going to curse. I mean, you might, but that's just an example. You pick up on things, the people that you're around. So Calpurnia, growing up mostly around white people, began to speak more intellectually like a white person would in that time period. But when she confronted Eula, what is that her name? Eula or Lula? I think I got her Lula in first period. Eula. Is it Lula?
It's Lula.
Eula is the operator. That's where I got that from. Okay, Lula, she was hateful back to Lula, and she called her the N-word, and Scout had never heard her use that before. So Scout is confused. Why do you talk one way when you're around black people, and you talk a different way when you're around white people? What is Calpurnia's response to that? How does she explain herself?
She said because it's polite to talk that way.
Yes. It's polite to talk that way. And how would the rest of the black community feel if Calpurnia comes to them and she's speaking proper English like a white person? How would they feel? What? They would feel like she was trying to do what? Garrett?
They'd feel disrespected because she was trying to be above them.
Yes. And that's how she explains it. She says, if I were to go there and speak the way I speak when I'm with you all, they would see me as thinking that I was better than them. And she doesn't want anybody to feel like that. So that's how she explains the difference in the way she talks around the people that she's with. And who do they find rocking in the rocking chair when they come back from church? And Alexandra, who is a nightmare. So tonight you will read 13, 14, 15, I'm assuming. It's on your calendar. Okay, if you have your own laptop, go ahead and you're going to need your book still, so keep it nearby. If you have your own laptop, go ahead and take that out. Does anybody not have a laptop? Okay, yeah. That's okay because y'all can still get started on what you're doing. You'll just do the work on, like, you can figure out what you want to do and then transfer it to a Google Slides when you do get access to. I have one if y'all want to fight over it. I'm just kidding, don't fight over it. Please. These people might want to hear me explain what we're doing next, so I'm going to keep that on. The extra one is over there.
Do you just want us to do it on Google Docs?
No, I'm gonna tell you how to do it. So once you get to Canvas, you're gonna go to your modules. And it's that bottom assignment in the To Kill a Mockingbird unit, the chapters 7 through 12 assignment. All right, so please note that this is not due. You do not have to have this submitted until Wednesday night at 11:45, if you need that much time, okay? Now, you may work on it starting today and have class time tomorrow, and you may be done with it by then. But I wanted to give you that extra time because you have other classes that you're working in, and I understand that. Okay, so this assignment is going to cover chapters 7 through 12, okay? What you are looking for is you are looking for 4 symbols, 4 total. It can be ones we talked about today. It could be different ones that you found. Whatever you want to use is fine, but you have to identify 4 symbols, all right? That very first bullet point, you will create a Google Slides presentation. You're not presenting anything. It's just being submitted to me, okay? But I think it will look visually better on a Google Slides than it would just on a Google Doc, okay? Underneath there, I've given you everything that must be included on your Google Slides, okay? The very first slide, you should give the title of the book, the author's name, please spell it correctly, you have it right there in front of you, and the title of this assignment, which is chapter 7 through 12, Symbolism. Okay? Let me scroll down a little bit. On each slide, the first thing you must have is an image. Okay? So let's say I'm going to use a clock as my first symbol, is the one I'm going to do first. Okay? You have 2 options for the image. Some people are really artistically inclined and enjoy drawing pictures. Okay? If you are one of those people, you have the option to draw the image, okay? You will just simply take a picture of what you draw, and you'll use that as your photo on your slides, okay? If you're not artistically inclined and it would look like a first grader did it, please opt for option 2, which is you would find an image of a clock somewhere online, okay? But if you are using images from the internet, you must create a slide at the end that gives a link to all 4 photos that you used. What?
What if we like put them in through the little typey thing, with the plus image, and then search through? How do we source them?
Oh, like through Google Slides?
Yeah. We have to do it then? I'm pretty sure they're already.
Right. So if you use a Google Slides image, on your last slide, you'll just put photo 1 was taken from Google Slides, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to give a link there. But if you go to Google and you type in image of clock and you use it from a site, you have to give that link in your presentation or in your slides. So everybody good on the image. You've got 2 options. You can draw it, take a picture, put it on your slides, or you can just find an image and put it on your slide. All right? The second thing you must have is a quote, okay? So you could put the quote as the title. You could put your image and then your writing part, or however you want to do it. The quote must be from the novel, and it must be relevant to what the image is. So if I'm going to use the clock as my image, as my symbol, then I need to go back and find a quote about a clock to show that there actually is a clock in the story. Now, you're not going to find a quote that tells you what the object is a symbol for because symbols are inferred. They're not directly stated. All right? That's why in the last part, the paragraph, you must give a brief description of the symbol. So if I'm doing the clock, I would talk about how we see Jim find the timepiece in the knothole, and then we also see a clock in chapter 10 with Mrs. DeBose. You must include the chapter that the symbol is found in your writing, okay? Talk about what the object is symbolic of, okay? So like I said earlier, what I believe a clock symbolizes, yours may be a little bit different, what you think. And that's okay. That's why I love English and literature so much, because there's so much room for different interpretations of things, okay? But if you're going to go way off in left field and talk about how the clock is a symbol for something that we ain't talked about, you better be able to get back up why you think that, okay? And that should be the last part, how you came to the conclusion of that symbolism. And you can't say because Ms. Taylor said so in our discussion. You have to put a different answer, okay? So 4 symbols total. So really you should only, if you use images from the internet, you should have 6 slides total. If you use your own pictures, you'll only have 5 slides, okay? Don't forget that last piece of giving credit to where you found the image if you find it online somewhere. Does anybody have questions? You do not have anything extra other than reading the chapters. So like, this is not due tonight, so maybe work on it in class a little bit and then read your chapters tonight for homework. Then tomorrow, work some more on it and read your chapters. You'll have chapters tomorrow night, but then you won't have to read on Wednesday. You won't have anything reading on Wednesday. Okay? So you may have questions. The quotes that you wrote on your sticky notes, please put those in the chapters where you got the quotes from. So, like, Connor, you can go ahead and start thinking about what symbols you want to use, finding the quotes, and then you can just add it to Google Slides at home. That's